Hey everybody, who's your Jedi here with another review for you. This time talking episode 7 of Legends of Tomorrow called Marooned. And this is one of those episodes where they've got an action plot going on, but it's really just so that they can have some action on the show. And it's really more about the little character bits that they have going on here. We focus in once again on Rip and learn more about his past. We get a real nice resolution to the whole Captain Cold and Heatwave situation, and everybody has their little moments this episode. So let's just kind of jump right into things. First of all, this episode was a real treasure trove of nods to stuff from the DC universe. Just to kind of go through some of the things that people have pointed out. One that I missed was the Time Pirates ship was called the Acheron, which is the name of some demon in the DC universe that I've never heard of. Uh, the character from the comic books that Stein mentions. Again, that's another guy who actually was a character in the DC universe in the old time 1950s comics. Here, he's been incorporated in as an in-universe fictional character, kind of like what they did with Commander Captain Carrot, and I think Blue Devil as well. Um, let's see, what else? What else? Well, hang on, I got a little list here of things that I was looking at that. Yes, of course. The two big ones were characters that Rip Hunter mentioned, like Imperix and Kanjar Ro. Um, In Kanjaro, very important character from the old timey Justice League comics. The one that really got me excited was when the pirate introduced himself and he said his name was John Valor. Oh my god, I about fell out of my chair. In the comics, John Valor is a character from I guess originally created back in the 1950s, and he was just sort of this pirate character who lives back in the 1700s, I think it was. And if I remember right, he was a British privateer. But where I know the character from is that his ghost was actually a reoccurring and rather important character in one of my all-time favorite comic book series ever, which was James Robinson's Starman from the 90s. And I mean, John Valor's ghost, he had pretty interesting thing that was going on with him that Starman ultimately helped him sort out over this big, long course of the series. And it's just one of the things that's like, oh my god, I can't believe they actually went and used John Valor. Now, in the comics, Valor was presented as a good guy. Here, he's just straight up, he's just pretty straightforward villain. Um, his actual thing was he was called the Black Pirate, and here it is, he's a pirate, and he's character dresses in black. I mean, it's just a nod, but still, I mean, we've also seen Opal City mentioned. I guess it was on Arrow or Flash. I can't remember which one, but either way, it's just nice to see that somebody over in the writers' room over at the CW is obviously a Starman fan, and as somebody for whom that series held an extremely precious place in my heart, that just makes me so happy. So let's see what else. Well, let's kind of focus in on the smaller stuff with the characters, and then kind of um, go as we go along. Nothing really huge to say about Jax this episode. It was nice to see him step in there though, and sort of be the reasonable person, try and play peacemaker between Rip and Heatwave, showing that even though he's easily the youngest member of the team, and he has his bad moments, Jax at the end of the day is a pretty level-headed and smart guy. So points to him. It was really hilarious watching Stein just sort of fanboy out about being in space and talking about comics as a kid, and I love that bit where he says oh well, why didn't you become an astronaut? Like, oh yeah, NASA's got this thing about people who are nearsighted, and then they go yeah, NASA also has a thing about people who like to smoke weed too. I'm like, oh, oh, that was a burn. That was a burn on Stein. But yeah, just watching Stein just absolutely just be this total unabashed fanboy, and offhandedly off screen beating up this thug and then going, "That'll teach you to mess with an astrophysicist." It's like, oh man. I mean, the real only downside to Jackson's time this episode is they never seem to think to touch to form Firestorm, even though that would really be an enormously helpful asset in this situation. And Rip never even says to them, hey, maybe you guys should form Firestorm and come with me in case this is a trap. Just kind of keep the whole being on fire thing under wraps and then break it out if something goes wrong. But it doesn't. And that just seemed monumentally stupid. I mean, yeah, there are things that you have to allow for just because if you did that, there wouldn't be any story. I mean, I've used it time and time again. That episode of The Flash where Heatwave and Captain Cold are rampaging through the city, shooting all this stuff at cops, their crazy guns at the cops. I'm like, you do realize in the real world these guys would have been gunned down by police snipers on a building rooftop in like 5 seconds flat, right? But you can't do that on a TV show because if you do, then there's no story. It's the same reason why on Arrow, whenever there's a huge problem, they can't always just say like, well, why don't we have Barry come and help us? Because if you have the Flash come in, then there's no story because he could probably sort the situation out in 5 seconds. Again, I mean, it's the same in comics. It's like, well, why doesn't Batman call Superman for help? Well, okay, they've offered several explanations for that in the comics, but again, the main one is if Batman calls Superman for help, there's no effing story. Plus, it makes Batman look like an impotent punk. So, yeah, but there's a limit to that. And when it's in a situation like this, especially towards the end where Stein and Jax are right next to each other and the bad guys are probably about to kill them and they don't form Firestorm, then it just crosses over into are these guys morons? Let's see. What else? The Kendra and Ray storyline. Well, that continues to be fun, and it was really a blast to watch them sit around and talk about Star Trek with each other. And I was like, oh, Kendra's a Star Trek fan too. Okay, that's cool. I like that. And nobody remarks on this. Like, yeah, nobody thinks anything about the pretty girl also liking Star Trek. I mean, we do live in the day and age where various jerks on the internet will ramble on about fake geek girls. Like, that's actually something to get upset about. I mean, okay, man, maybe the booth babe at Comic Con doesn't really like Green Lantern. If so, so what? But yeah, I mean, I've said it before. If I can go off on a tangent time and time again, that as geeks we are living in a golden age. When I was in high school, well, of course I knew that there were women, for example, who were into comics. But God, man, trying to find them was about as easy as actually trying to find a unicorn. Yeah. Well, okay, maybe not quite that hard. I knew that. Well, you get what I'm saying. Here, I mean, yeah, girls liking geeky stuff. Well, while not without its issues in this day and age, because internet and people are jerks, plus various other social reasons. But yeah, we're generally living in a real golden age where, yeah, a pretty girl who likes something geeky is not really going to be something that really makes people arch their eyebrows. And, thank God. Again, it's a real golden age we're living in. Comparative. But, yeah. So, watching them sort of banter together and, like, Ray being all like, oh, wait, you don't think I'm Kirk? You think I'm more Picard? And then he's just like, what was it? Who was it that he compared himself to? Well, it was somebody else, and then Han Solo. No, whatever. Yeah, that was very fun, and well, I did like, Ray stepping up there and going out there trying to fix the suit. Again, very cool stuff. And they did have that very fun conversation where it's like, oh, I don't have a favorite color. I don't have a favorite Beetle. Again, doubtlessly a nod to the fact that originally when the character was conceived, he was going to be Ted Cord, not Ray Palmer, who, of course, in the comics is Blue Beetle. The only thing about that whole situation that I didn't really like was where Kendra goes like, "Yeah, you realize I'm kind of actually really in charge." I'm like, um, "Look, Kendra, I can kind of see like, no, Rip actually put Ray in charge. If he wanted to put you in charge, he would have said that you're in charge." I can see it more like it's understood that you're there to sort of make sure that Ray's enthusiasm doesn't get doesn't he doesn't get carried away with his own enthusiasm. to be so a little bit of a level-headed reminder. As somebody pointed out, like she's basically there to be Spock, to a certain degree. Um, but yeah, pretty clearly you're not in charge, because why in the name of God would he put you in charge? Um, you're not really experienced with technical stuff, which pretty understandable why Rick would want somebody like with that sort of technical expertise in charge. You don't really have leadership skills, which Ray, as the head of of an extremely successful company, does and would have. Um, so yeah, I mean that's not to take anything away from Kendra. She's really cool and all, but she's not quite earned that leadership role just yet. But I kind of think that was just her just giving Ray a hard time rather than, oh no, Rip was bullshitting when he put you in charge for no fathomable reason. I just don't think that particular bit was terribly well written. Now Kendra kind of coming around to the whole kissing Ray thing feels a little forced. I kind of would have liked them to sort of let a little more time pass with from Carter having died. But again, they've said several times in universe, for example, that time has been passing. It's been a week. That they even say in this episode that the people have been sitting around kind of doing nothing. Plus, in high stakes situations, carpe diem, right? Let's see. Um, Speaking of Rip, I guess we should talk about him next. Uh, Now, what they did here with his wife Miranda and Captain Baxter sort of mess around a little bit, having like in the comics, from what I understand, Bonnie Baxter was like the old timey name for Rip Hunter's girlfriend. Here, they sort of put somebody who was very similar to him. Him being able to have a conversation with somebody who was also from the Time Masters, who isn't actively trying to kill him, and just sort of see their reaction to who he has become. Captain Baxter is obviously just absolutely disgusted by Rip. As far as she's concerned, he's somebody who's betrayed everything that they've stood for. And oh yeah, they mentioned Vanishing Point. Oh man, if you're familiar with like time travel in the DC universe, you know that Vanishing Point is a place that is a big deal. Oh man, I'm so hoping that somewhere down the line we get to see the Linear Men on this show, because the Linear Men are cool. I like the Linear Men, and having somebody who's also kind of time police people, but who are not the Time Masters. Yeah, that sounds cool. Sounds real cool. But anyway, then we also get to see some more of Rip's wife. And I really like what they did with her. The idea that she was also somebody who was in the Time Masters, and somebody who apparently was even better at being a Time Master than Rip was. I mean, that's a nice twist there. Kind of reminds me a little bit of what they did on Supernatural with Mary Winchester. Uh, the only problem here is that I wasn't exactly feeling the greatest amount of chemistry between Arthur Derville and the actress playing his wife. And when they kind of do the whole thing like, oh, I'm going to resign from the Time Masters so you can be a Time Master, that's like, oh, I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, it ultimately did pay off, though, in Rip having that speech to where he says, like, look, I found something better, more important than any oath I ever made to the Time Masters, and that's love. And this reminds me of something from the. If you watch my videos regularly, I like to talk a lot about the Star Wars MMO, Star Wars: The Old Republic. And in short, there's just one thing where one of the Jedi characters can romance someone and get married, and a fellow Jedi, no less. Um, and she'll ultimately send you this letter where she kind of talks about how basically she says, the Jedi teach that love is something that we have to be careful to stay away from, that it can open us up to the dark side and all this other stuff. And then she goes on to say, but what they forget is that love is also great for teaching patience, for teaching kindness, for teaching compassion. And Rip's wife makes a rather similar case, and this ultimately leads to Rip sort of echoing her, that the Time Masters have basically really divorced themselves from their own humanity. And they see that as a necessity in order to do their job. I mean, Captain Baxter even says there is no higher calling. There is no higher calling than being a Time Master. But again, the problem is that they tend to view history and other people as just distractions, as things that weigh them down. And divorcing there are certainly times where you do need to set your emotions aside, especially when you're dealing with something extremely serious. And obviously, just protecting the time stream would be something where you can't play favorites, where you have to just accept things as they are. Cable, the famous time traveler from the Marvel universe, had this really great saying that sort of boiled it all down. What is. And that's very much the philosophy of the Time Masters. If history says that Vandal Savage crushes the Earth under his boot, then so be it. That's history. But Rip kind of comes in there and makes the case of like, well, if we allow this, then how are we any better than him? If we totally remove compassion and love from our lives, what are we? Now, granted, that's Rip's real. Basically, it's a little bit more low key, more for Rip. It's just like, man, my wife and son are dead. I'm pissed about this. I want to change this because I can't bear this loss. But as we've seen him grow in terms of his philosophy, like in the last episode, he's willing to just leave everybody in Star City in the future to their own devices, and says these people don't matter, they're not real. And ultimately, he comes around and is like, you know what, we need to protect and help everybody wherever we go. That is the direction. What I'm trying to say is that's the direction I think that Rip is moving in philosophically, where he's saying, look, where he's going to be saying like, look, sure, we have to protect history, and messing with history for our own for selfish reasons is wrong. But there has to be a limit to what we can take, what we will accept. And the idea of humanity just being turned into Vandal Savage's lapdogs is just not acceptable. And if I get to save my family in the process, well, yeah, okay, Rip's not exactly being entirely selfless in that situation, but it's hard to argue that that stance would be wrong. Um, let's see, what else? Oh yeah, nothing really huge to say about Sarah this episode, but I really like that conversation she had with Snart, where he asks her, what's it like to die? And Sarah just sort of says, "It's not like what you think it was. It's just like being lonely is what I felt like after I had died." And it does make sense that someone would ask her that. I mean, what is it like to die? It's something we've all wondered. One thing though that bugged me about Sarah this episode is when she gets into that fight with Heatwave. Basically, she loses. I mean, there was this one episode of Arrow where she was talking, basically saying like, "Oh, I'm gonna go out there and beat the League of Assassins' asses," and Diggle is like, "Hey, whoa," or I guess it was the League of Assassins, somebody. And Diggle's like, "Whoa, you're not thinking clearly. You can't go out there. You need to just stay here and calm down." And Sarah says to him, "Diggle, you realize that I'm League of Assassins, and that to us, special forces people might as well be kindergartners. So are you going to get out of my way, or am I going to have to hurt you?" And Diggle sort of grumbles for a second, but he ultimately steps aside. So here, Sarah, League of Assassins trained, basically loses a fight to Heatwave, who's been shown to be pretty damn good at fighting, but at the end of the day is just a thug. What the hell? I mean, at least it's been kind of something we kind of seen coming for a while with Nissa, where she's won one fight with Oliver, had a draw, and then every other time she went up against Oliver, she got spanked. But Sarah? man, she well, when she died, let's just put it say she lost some levels. That's all I can say. Or she was really, really, really good at bluffing Diggle back on that old episode of Arrow. But anyway, of course, the big thing this episode is what's going on between Snart and Mick and Snart. And I really liked how Snart sort of kind of gave their backstory, showing that he and Heatwave have basically been friends for most of his life. I mean, it's a little hard to tell exactly how old Snart is supposed to be, but I'm guessing it's probably something in the neighborhood of like these two guys have been working together, watching each other's back for probably something like 20 years, give or take. So the idea of Mick backstabbing him and them having to turn on each other, I mean that's obviously going to be really painful for Snar. That's just like the one thing that, like Mick and his sister are basically the two people in the world that he trusts, and having one of them betray him, turn on him. I mean, man, Wentworth Miller really just knocked it out of the park. I mean, Snart is literally holding back tears towards the end of all of this. But I mean, at the end of the day, Mick is who he is. Mick's an attack dog, right? And Snart was the guy who was holding his leash. As much as Mick probably like to think otherwise. Yeah, I mean that is what their relationship really was. And I like that. Really love that moment where Rip said to him, like, "Look, I was never really interested in you having you on the team. You just got to come along because I knew you and Snart were a package deal." And I mean that has to hurt Mick. You know, he has formed some kind of a bond with the team. He does to at least some small degree, as we've seen, care about them at least a little bit. And here to just see that he was basically unwanted baggage. It's just like, well, hell, if that's how if you feel about me, then why? Why should I stick with you? My best friend just took me away from what would basically have been heaven on earth for me, and told me that, as far as he's concerned, he's the boss of me. I mean, Heatwave turning on the team is completely understandable from Heatwave's perspective. And while I was watching the episode, I was like, well, is he going to turn around and turn the tables on the Pirates? I'm like, nope, that's not going to happen. They want us to think it's going to happen, but it's not. And of course, it turned out to be right. Now, I've been saying before that it was really only a matter of time before they killed somebody else on the team that my number one choice was going to be Heatwave. Well, this episode, they don't quite kill him. It's heavily implied that, but again, we don't see it happen, so obviously it didn't happen. Plus, this name of this episode is Marooned, and nobody was really all that marooned. More like attacked by space pirates. So the idea seems to be more like, and we never did see exactly where and when it was that Cold took Mick. So my idea is probably they just genuinely did do exactly that. They marooned him in somewhere in time and space where Mick can't hurt anybody. And yeah, I know that I'm not the only one who's probably thinking of the movie Old Yeller at the end of this episode where it looked like Snart was going to kill Mick. If you're not familiar with it, Old Yeller is a movie from the 1950s about basically about a boy and his dog. If you ever had to read Where the Red Fern Grows in school, the themes are somewhat similar. And this movie is infamous, if you've never heard of it or never seen it, for being able to reduce anyone to tears by the very end. I remember watching it once when I was a kid, and I'm like, they got to the end of the movie, and I'm just like, I'm just crying. It's just like, oh God, this is so sad. It's so sad. And the great thing about Old Yeller is like it doesn't matter who you are. If you're like the toughest, most macho guy in the world, it is understood that you have a free pass to cry at the end of Old Yeller. If you don't cry at the end of that movie, you are a robot. I mean, that's just one of the facts of life. So yeah. Now, granted, I wasn't exactly shedding any tears over Heatwave because I knew that they aren't going to kill him. But Snart crying like that, yeah, totally understandable. let's see. There's another nod to the comics I just thought of and I almost forgot. It slipped my mind what it was. Yeah. So it is established here in this episode that Rip's Hunter is not our captain's real name, and they do quite explain it quite nicely. It's like, well, why this isn't your name? It's like, well, then my enemies could, potentially strike against my ancestors or my descendants. In the comics, Rip put it quite nicely. If anybody knew where he says, basically, if anybody knew what my real name was, they just go back in time and kill me in my crib when I was a baby. And yeah, I mean, in his adventures, it's seen. People do that. There was this one where some bad guys were screwing with a time traveler by the name of Gabriel Walker, and they said, "Oh yeah, hey, you remember that one friend you had when you were a kid? The only friend you had as a kid? Yeah, well, we just went back in time and killed him. So your entire childhood was spent friendless. Up. Oh wait. Now we're gonna go back in time and kill you in your crib when you're a baby. Oh, you're fading from history. Bye. We just did all of that to you beforehand just to watch you suffer." If I remember correctly, that was Per Degaton and his crew. And remember, they have mentioned that character on the show before. Okay, so I've been rambling on about this episode for. Oh, and of course, if you know the comics, you know who Rip Hunters is, and well, yeah. If you know the comics, you know who Rip Hunter's real name is, and why he's important. Let's put it that way. All right, I've been rambling for the better part of half an hour, so I'm going to call it here, guys. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. Until next time, take care and have a good one.